In this episode, we discuss the measles outbreak that's currently ongoing in the Southwest United States and RFK Jr.'s apparent about face on his position on the measles vaccine. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who's okay, but his takes are sick. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, ready to show him how you go crazy today?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I was sick, but if my takes were okay. Like, would that change my coolness in your eyes? But we don't have to go there. Because
we want to avoid that, man. We want to avoid that.
I'll take just being cool and having sick takes, just in case. So, sorry. Let's keep going.
Yeah. But before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording on April 8th, 2025. And Tunde, we're seeing a measles outbreak going on now in the Southwest United States, with the worst of it in Texas. And government officials, have been on site working to get it under control. Now, we don't see measles outbreaks that much anymore. Many claim that it was eliminated, like the vaccine from, decades ago and, getting that widespread in, and measles just didn't circulate that much. Whereas it was something when we were younger in the 80s that you heard about, from time to time. But this current outbreak has hundreds of cases, and we've seen fatalities and so forth. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been on site and recently came out with an endorsement of the measles vaccine, the MMR vaccine, as a way to fight the outbreak, which was in contrast to much of what he has said publicly over both the short term, when he's talked about vitamin A and different things like that, and the long term, where he's really positioned himself as an anti-vaccine person. So Tunde, what are your initial thoughts, just to get us started on kind of the outbreak itself and, what we're seeing now from a health perspective, but then also RFK Jr.'s reaction to it?
Yeah, it's a good question, good topic, and good lead-in, because there's a few different areas to go. So I would say my first reaction, I felt kind of pleasantly relieved to see an adult, someone in their early 70s that could actually break from, I guess, the ideology they have been espousing publicly based on their own experience and their own, looking at facts and details. And so in that sense, I can say I was glad to see RFK make a factual statement that the MMR vaccine is the best way to prevent the spread of measles.
You mean take in new facts, adjust your kind of thoughts and your positions, and then move forward from there?
Yeah, and that's interesting.
That's quite a capability there.
Correct. It'd be amazing,
I joke, but it's not. That's not something we can expect from people.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it's like this is the word I'm looking for. Refreshing. Let's say that. It's refreshing to see that in a leader today. That's why. And I'm sad to say that I'm being refreshed by one guy doing it out of many people that are in leadership right now. But that's kind of was my overriding initial thought. Obviously, we'll have a nice conversation about a few other thoughts I had. But it was just that I was kind of refreshed, saying, it's nice to see him be able to do an about face once faced with certain realities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we expect that happen within an hour. Every Law and Order show has that, where people start off thinking one thing and then more information comes out and they're like, oh, actually, we think it's this. So I think, from we do seem to, we have an appreciation for that in some settings, but in other settings, we, human beings tend to not want to go that direction. I think that what it reminds me of actually is revolt of the public.
Yes.
Negation, meaning the idea of we're just against whatever is going on out there, doesn't work that well when you're in a position of leadership. So when RFK Jr. wasn't in a position of leadership, he had the convenience to say a bunch of things and take a bunch of positions because people's lives, generally speaking, now people have claimed that, things he said overseas and so forth have caused problems and death, but people's lives aren't necessarily at stake. So when you're in a position of leadership, there are people's lives at stake. And so for him to to me, this suggests that he takes the position seriously. The idea that we have an outbreak now anyway, I'm not one of the people that thinks that this thing would have been or was gone forever anyway. So I'm not saying, oh, well, it was gone and now it's back because people didn't vaccinate. I'm a person who is I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm skeptical of the vaccine industry, and primarily because I'm skeptical of big pharma in general. I don't know that their interests are always and their incentives are always aligned with health outcomes for us. Like sometimes I think they have other incentives other than us being healthy. So the entire big pharma industry, like I'm not specific to vaccines, but the entire industry, vaccines are a part of that. But I think that it's good that I think it's good that they're there. And they're not just from some ivory tower somewhere making declarations of what things need to be. And this is what we know. We don't care whatever else is going on down there. Everybody just does what I say, and then everything will work out. And then the thing about the vaccine to me is, again, because I'm not someone who's out here banging the table for vaccines, but they do seem to be the best option in situations like this. But not to say it's a great option or a perfect option. Definitely not a perfect option, but it does seem to be the best option for preventing severe illness and death for something like this. And so when something is the best option and you're in the public health space, not private health decisions, but public health space, sometimes you have to get behind something that is not perfect and that you can say, oh yeah, this has some in your mind, at least, like, oh yeah, I'm not crazy about certain parts of this, but it seems to be the best option we have from a public standpoint.
Yeah. And I think the idea of skepticism and a healthy skepticism is important because there's a difference between, and I think this is what we've seen in this recent era, and I think there was a great reference to the book we just did a show on last week. No plug there for the audience, but Revolt to the Public, because I thought of the similar things from the book. Obviously, it's fresh in our head, but I think it was a great read, and then seeing this and doing this discussion here, because the idea is a crisis of authority. That's what I kept thinking of, is this is what it looks like. And the idea of, like we talked about, the borders and the centers, right? Like RFK Jr. was a border actor in our kind of culture and society up until now. And what that means, just really quick for the audience, means to James's point, kind of in your comments just now, is that RFK was in the outside of leadership. And so it's different when you're on the outside of leadership and you are criticizing whatever is going on kind of in the mainstream of what, the culture of the leadership is promoting. Now he's in leadership. And I think it's interesting how people, I don't know this for a fact because I haven't talked to RFK Jr. since he has visited with these two families. And just for the audience, I've never talked to RFK Jr. But from reading and preparing for today, he met with the two families whose children died of the measles recently in this outbreak. And part of me just seems to think that, we're all human beings. And at the end of the day, maybe from being on the outside of leadership and power, not having the authority and the responsibility of being the director of, a large agency like Health and Human Services in the United States, he felt one way. But when he actually met parents of children who died, and maybe they had a conversation, explained to him what happened, and maybe he, like we're talking about, maybe he listened to some other scientists and doctors, he changed his tune. And so I think, that's nice to see. And what I want to get into, James, about this skepticism is, because it goes back to a lot of things we've seen in our culture and our society. I think people like you and I, as we've talked about in recent shows, that are, we like to read, we're curious people. We're not offended if our point of view or our thoughts are challenged. We're willing to take that kind of stuff and see if there's different facts than maybe we were armed with originally in a discussion. But there's a lot of people that aren't, and they're very skeptical. And so I think that's the thing to me that stands out here is the idea of the crisis of authority. The crisis of authority that leads people from a healthy skepticism to maybe paranoia.
But they're not really skeptical. And that's really my issue when we get to this stuff, because they're skeptical only of one thing. They're only skeptical of the official position, because it amazes me always. Like, I'm a skeptical person, right? Like, and when people were talking about COVID vaccine, I was skeptical, like, oh, okay, let's see what's happening here. Let me let a couple million people get it first before me, stuff like that. But then I was also skeptical of ivermectin. I didn't just say, oh, I'm skeptical of COVID vaccine. So yeah, let's just do ivermectin. Like, it's like, well, no, I'm skeptical of that too, And then I'm looking at that closely. And it's like, oh, well, that doesn't strike my fancy because my skepticism. And then what it is really though is kind of a negation of whatever and this is, kind of going into that. It's a negate whatever the public authorities are saying. If the public authorities were saying ivermectin, these people would have been against that, And so what it strikes me as is not a ability, not a desire to look at things and weigh them and say, okay, is this something that is that I can get behind, or is this something that I don't think it smells right? It is almost a reflexive reaction against kind of these official positions and an irrational embrace of things that aren't. And again, I'm saying that I look at vaccines as definitely not perfect. Things I'm concerned about, again, particularly because of the incentive. When you have a secret vaccine court that the federal government sets up, and I'm like, well, hey, hold on. What do you mean a secret court? That if you get injured, you have to go here and you can't go to public court? That is an incentive. That, to me, that creates an incentive for vaccine companies to try to keep things quiet. So I'm like, okay, that doesn't add up, right? But then I look at the whole, that in itself isn't going to say, okay, well, I'm just completely out on vaccines altogether. I'm going to maintain my skepticism. I'm going to engage with them in my own terms, But again, I'm doing that as a personal level. When you're talking about public health, it's a different question, And so I also think that when you look at the situation where RFK has to say, okay, we're on the ground, we have this outbreak. The fact that he doesn't want this kind of thing to happen on his watch also will kind of influence his decision making. And so, again, to your initial point, the fact that he's making the adjustment, apparent adjustment, because just a couple of weeks ago he was out there saying, "Oh, it's vitamin A," and then that's another thing. It's like, well, where I point out kind of the vitamin A is I take cod liver oil, but it's something that. You have to know, if you're going to take vitamin A, you need to know the difference between synthetic vitamin A and natural vitamin A, because there's a huge difference, and one of them can be really bad for you, one of them can be really good for you. And and then also you have to understand you can't take them in high doses because you have to build up it in your body, or you have to, there's more to it basically. And
let me jump on that one.
He was out there throwing that out without any of this other background information that I may know because I'm interested in that independently. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of dangerous to just be telling people, hey, take a bunch of vitamin A, because if they go to the store and get most of the stuff you'll find is the artificial stuff and they start popping that, they can create other problems, So it's very difficult. These are things that are difficult to navigate on a personal level and then on a societal level. When you do have people that just want to jump behind something and not think about it, you have to be very careful as far as the messages you give. And that's why a lot of times you see this desire for uniformity and secrecy, which isn't great, but it doesn't always necessarily mean there's something sinister.
Correct. And that's where the idea of a healthy skepticism, you can draw the line between that and just straight paranoia. Because I would say this topic is interesting for you and I personally. Yeah. You have a lot more of a healthy skepticism to the vaccine stuff than I do. I'm one of those that's
remember, I'm skeptical of big pharma in general. And
but that's my point. I'm just making a point that I'm the type that the doctor says, go do it. I'm like, all right, whatever. And you're the one that's like, nah, I'm skeptical of this and that. And so my point is that we can still be friends, right? We don't have to have a fist fight about it, right? And I can accept that your skepticism is healthy. Even though I'm not as skeptical as you are, I don't knock you for the skepticism, because you're not being a paranoid, delusional guy. You're not saying that everybody in big pharma is going to put nanobots in this vaccine and put it in your arms.
Which that's again, what I mean. And so, how could you be a skeptic and fall for that? To me, it's just like, if you're a skeptic, that has to be like.
Well, here's the thing, James, because this is why I want to stay on that thing about vitamin A. That's why that term from that book is so apropos with the way we are today as a culture, which is this crisis of authority. Yeah. Because here's the thing, and I want to try and get through this real quick, because I want to talk about the vitamin A, but as I'm thinking about my own knowledge of science and medicine and all that, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm a guy who's a financial planner. So I'm kind of the average guy that's outside of the medical world looking in. I took some biology and anatomy classes in college. Great. That was 30 years ago almost. So I'm not sitting here with a bunch of serious knowledge in my head, more so than I think the average public. But I do have the old authority trust in the idea of virology and science and facts-based evidence. So I'm going to say this, James, going back to this is why, to me, leadership is very important. RFK in 2023, I'm just quoting from an article that we'll have in the show notes. During an interview with popular podcaster Joe Rogan, Kennedy denied that the measles vaccine had led to a drop in deaths. He claimed that malnutrition was the root cause of deaths. And I'm just forwarding in the article, not to read the whole thing. Kennedy did not cite any evidence for that claim. So it goes back to what you're saying. He's refuting the authority, saying that the vaccine, and this is the interesting thing going back to vitamin A.
The vaccine didn't work to prevent death. See,
correct, but the word prevent is very important. And this is what I saw with COVID and the gumming up of reality that affected the population. The measles vaccine, from what I'm reading, has a 93% effective rate of transmission of, preventing someone getting the disease on the first shot. And when you get the booster of the measles vaccine, it brings it up to 97%. And that's measles. So 3% of people out of 1,000 people, 970 on average after the second shot will not contract the virus. 3% will contract. And to your point, maybe 1 or 2 people out of that 1,000 will have a negative effect. And that's a shame, but like that's what you're saying. For a mass population, that's maybe the secret courts and all that. Maybe sometimes to have herd immunity, you got to accept that there's 1% of people going to have a negative reality.
See, and then the thing is that when we look at that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get rid of the whole thing from a public health standpoint. That's what I'm getting at. The point. It's not perfect. There are issues. Now we should look at how those issues are addressed. Maybe see now. Here's where it's tough because it's like, so from a public health standpoint, is it better to keep that stuff secret, or is it better to have it out there because of what you're saying with the crisis of authority? Because some people will take those instances and run with them, and then other people are like, "Oh, you make it worse by keeping it secret." I don't know if you are or not. I mean,
let's not jump there yet because I know we'll go to things like that. Like, should this be, how should we treat this, from the mass standpoint? But to stay on what you're saying, I think this is where you can break from a healthy skepticism to the paranoia and the really distrusting of the whole system. Because like we just said, like accepting that if 1,000 people get something, maybe 1 or 2 have a really negative reaction. That's terrible. And that's not something I'm trying to say it should be swept under the rug. But what I'm saying is, yes, then do I get a bit suspicious when I learn from a friend like you that there's a secret court for Big Pharma and all that? Yeah, it makes me a little suspicious. Also, I don't like the idea of Big Pharma getting away with more stuff, like, not having to pay the lowest cost, when selling drugs to the government, all that. So it gets me feeling like that. Oh, they're getting away with stuff and all that. But that's a much different, like I've got still a firewall in my head.
It gives you the inclination to want to paint with the broad brush at that point. Because then it's also, this whole thing is messed up. This whole thing is rigged, so to speak, as opposed to looking at those individual.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, just to go draw this arc here, what we're talking about. But when I hear someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Saying that measles vaccine doesn't lead to a drop in deaths, when we hear from the scientists, there's a 97% efficacy rate of not contracting the disease. And that when he says it's malnutrition, and then he goes into the vitamin A, like you're saying, I start thinking like, I'm not like a genius or a big scientist guy, but I recognize a virus is a virus and a vitamin does not cure a virus. Number one. Number two is after doing literally 30 seconds of reading in one paragraph, I learned that the vitamin A can help when someone already has a severe illness of measles. So that also is not about preventing the contraction of the illness. And so that's what we're getting at, James, which is I'm reading about this and I'm reading Kennedy's quotes about all this stuff. And I'm thinking the same thing you're thinking. What is it with the mindset of someone who is skeptical of the authority, like the scientists and the people who've got PhDs and study this stuff for their careers, but a guy who's an environmental lawyer for his career, who comes on a podcast and says, take vitamin A against a disease.
That hook, line, and sinker.
Exactly. And they don't go back and say, okay, well, let me actually at least look into what he's saying and kind of.
But the reason is that ultimately there's so much information that people just decide who they want to side with. Because even with the malnutrition and the nutritious piece, I'll correct you a little bit. The issue with the vitamin A, the biggest thing is that, yes, a healthy person If you are well nourished and have high levels of certain vitamins, vitamin D being one, vitamin A being another, if you have high levels of certain vitamins, then your own immune system works better. So it's not the vitamin that kills the virus, it's your own immune system that's better equipped to handle it. But guess what? If you have all those high levels there, you're also better equipped to deal with the vaccine and to be able to make sure you avoid the most negative consequences from the vaccine. So it's kind of like this old thing, like, oh, well, if your body's in good shape, then your body can deal with strains better than if your body's not in good shape. Think about if you have a lot of muscle and you fall down, you're going to be better protected than if you're all skin and bones, so to speak. And so, but you take all of this complexity and it's a lot, you throw it at people. And so people are vulnerable because of that complexity, and they'll just want to say, here, somebody else, just tell me, and so some people will look at the authorities, so to speak, and say, okay, I'll listen to the authorities. Other people will say, well, no, I don't trust the authorities because they're doing some things over there. They're doing some things over there. So I'll just trust this dude. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and to me, that's crazy, but I can understand it because it's just like, well, you more so have decided you don't want to trust them. Then I'm just so in line with this other person. And so I'm going to find somebody else that doesn't trust them and then go ahead with that. So all of that, bringing that back, I think it's good that if you're going to trust somebody, I'd rather you trust somebody that at the minimum can look at new information and then update his position. Where you really get into trouble is if you start following people that it doesn't matter what happens, they're still going to say the same thing no matter what, like nothing ever happened. So I would say I respect that Kennedy gets here, from his position and from taking in additional information. But I do want to keep us moving because I want to wrap this up. Do you think this will matter? Because he's gotten a lot of blowback from his former allies, the anti-vaccine people from this. And then, there are a lot of people who's kind of are locked in already to where they are. But do you think this will matter, or do you think this is kind of, look too little too late at least from Kennedy?
I hesitate to make predictions about what will influence the American culture through the media landscape over the next couple months. So let me definitely not.
So the answer then is it all depends on whether Musk and Zuckerberg decide to what they show people in there on Facebook and X and so forth.
I'm just saying I would be skeptical. I would rather predict the direction of the stock market over the next few months than what Americans will grab onto or not, honestly. And I'm not here to try and predict the stock market. That's my point. But that'll be maybe easier than predicting where these human brains all go. But no, on a serious note, man, so I wrote a note. It depends on how the information will be delivered. So you're already going down the road that we were going. Yeah. So because I put here
and TikTok
algorithms, and then I put, will skeptics see it? Because people like me and you see it, and it's like, all right, cool. He's like you said, I don't have to agree with everything RFK ever said, but I respect that he's here now. And I'm not here to, we could have a whole conversation about, do you beat him up about his past stuff and all that? I don't really care about that. Let's just move forward at this point. And the fact that he is talking sense and he says something that seems to be, and this is where I'm getting it back just at leadership. He's a leader. And what we've been affected by is leadership generally over the last decade or so. And what I'm saying is whether leadership's in or out of power, right? We've got influential people, and even that, like one of the two men you just named, right? People that have become cultural influences or influencers on our culture who are famous, whether they're political people or business people. And they have, let me put it this way, they have benefited from maintaining themselves in the spotlight by promoting some of this kind of messiness in our information landscape. That's probably the most eloquent way I can say it. And that's to me what stands about RFK is because children have died, and maybe that is the bridge. It's a bridge too far now. He's not going to continue once he's met with a family that has his kids that died. And it's in contrast, James, because I think this is what's happening, what we're seeing in this first couple of months of this administration, which is the ideologies of many crashing up against the rocks of reality of a system. And we could say RFK's crashing up against the reality of the ecosystem and health, right? That viruses are going to go through things like vitamins, and vaccines now seem to be the way to stop it. On another note, we have a president who's pushed tariffs and the stock market's crashing. So it's another example of an ideology crashing up against the rocks of reality. Maybe the stock market crashing isn't as effective as children dying at getting, the leader to say, hey, maybe I was wrong. But I think we're going to see a lot more of this, James, through the next few months. That's what I would say is reality is going to crash up against the rocks of ideology. And I don't know how people are going to react, because to your point, it's going to be about what they see and what they're
It'll be
allowed
about
to
what
see.
they see, and then whether they're the kind of person that can, if the consequences of whatever they see is something that wasn't their desired consequence, whether they can adjust and take in new information. This isn't necessarily flip your position or anything like that. Just take in new
Yeah.
information and adjust where you come down on something potentially. I think it's helpful. I don't think it's too little, too late. For the purpose of like the people that are kind of locked in either way. And remember, the harder it takes for you to come to a position, the more kind of locked in you are into that position. But the easier you come to a position, the people that are kind of flaky anti-vax, because that's what their algorithm says, those people maybe be like, oh, okay, well, this guy's looking at it anew and now is saying it. So the people who haven't worked hard to come to a position but kind of had it fed to them are probably more persuadable, with the wins, and so to speak. And that's just, that's not a knock against them. That's just any situation where it takes time and effort to come across information and to form an opinion and a position.
Yeah.
It's just those positions are generally more resilient than the ones that are fed to you through an algorithm. So I think that it could be helpful. I mean, again, it's not going to switch anybody who's staunch in this camp or staunch in that camp. But if the goal here is to try to lessen the spread of this and to have no more people die or less people die than otherwise would happen. And so I think that this will be effective for that. And so it's never like when you're in a position of authority, it's kind of like never too late to do the right thing. And I think he's doing the right thing here. Whether or not I thought he was doing the right thing, though, I would say that it's respectable to, again, take in new information, reevaluate what you're thinking and why you're thinking it, and then come out with either a new position or come out and explain why that you don't have a new position or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm happy that he's like actively engaging in the process of his job, because that's not given. As you talk about, like people don't seem to be doing that as much now. There's a lot of ivory tower governing and a lot of ivory tower stuff saying, hey, this is just what it's going to be. And whatever happens, happens. I don't care, because my means are my ultimate goal, not even the ends, so to speak. And whatever the ends are, we'll deal with it. So I think that it's helpful, like to have somebody responsive in government, because Lord knows we need it. We need more people that pay attention to the facts on the ground and can adjust. And ideally, our ends are aligned. And here, I think less death, less disease. Everybody kind of has the same ends. And so it's kind of an easier place to get to if you're going to adjust. In other settings, it may not be as easy. If you're talking about, hey, do you want broad-based prosperity, then some people might say, no, we just want prosperity at the top. And no, so even if you have people that can adjust on the fly, they may not have the same ends as someone else, and so we'll see. Those are more complicated. Here, we're just trying to prevent death, I think, and so let's keep the simple. So you got any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah. Just real quick, I find it interesting, and I'm concerned that we're going to see more examples of this in coming months, because as I'm preparing for today and reading stuff, again, this ideology stuff, the ideology of cutting all the budgets and all that. I looked up Health and Human Services as a department. They recently cut $12 billion that was granted to states specifically for, and I'm going to read from the article, This money funded vaccine programs, emergency preparedness, and infectious disease surveillance. To me, the last one was very important, the surveillance of these diseases, right? We got to know what's going on in the country. And that's just my concern. Like, I really do. Like, I agree 100% with what you said. I appreciate that RFK's come to this position, but he just came to it at a time where they cut $12 billion from states and fired 10,000 people this week. Yeah. So it's kind of, that's what I mean by the ideology is going to crash up against the rocks of reality.
Maybe not, man. I mean, the rich people want the tax cut, man. So,
so do I. I'm not that rich.
To go, apparently.
I'm not that rich, but I'm going to take it too, just so you know. No, but that's what I'm saying. Let's put it this way. Let's do a show in the year and let's see if my tax cut was worth it to offset cuts in surveilling infectious diseases. Let's see.
But no, I think we can wrap this topic from there. We appreciate everyone for joining us. Check out the second topic as well, and we'll talk soon.